Update 4 brought along a lot of new recipes, buildings and stuff in general, but arguably one of the biggest additions are drones, which now use batteries for fuel. Which is why today we're looking at how to create batteries at 100% efficiency. Once again, we are using the vanilla recipes, but I'm currently writing up a video on the best alternate recipes available in Update 4, so make sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss it. In this build, we will be producing a total of 120 batteries per minute, and for today's build, we will also be using the following resources: 30 raw quartz, 90 coal, 420 bauxite, 660 water, and 300 sulfur. These can be located on our 17 by 15 grid by the pink, black, brown and blue boxes. The light blue box and pipe will hold 60 water and the dark blue 600 water. We will also need enough resources to build the following: 11 refineries, 6 blenders, 3 foundries and 4 constructors. The build itself isn't particularly large, but there are a few things that get complicated, such as the water looping, which we'll talk about shortly. Note, we will use a mixture of belts according to the amount of resources required. For the ease of the build, it may be just easier to run Mark V belts. To do this, you will need alclad aluminum sheets, and thankfully we covered these in last week's video, which you can check the layout to in the top right hand corner of the video. Also, before we do get started, you can find this layout along with many others on our website satisfactorytips.com. The link to the article is in the description below. Step 1 of this build is to place all 6 blenders across the top of the build, with the outputs also facing the top of the build. For me, I've placed 2 foundation space in the top section to allow for buses and pipes. Each of these blenders will be set to batteries with the vanilla recipe at 100% clock speed. Next, we shall place the foundries and constructors. First, place 3 foundries in the bottom left-hand corner with the outputs facing the left of the build. These 3 foundries will be set to aluminium ingots. Again, these will run at 100% clock speed with a total output of 180 aluminium ingots. We will then place 2 constructors spanning the first and second column facing the top of the build, and I've placed these spanning the 6th and 7th row. These will be set to aluminum casing and should be fed by a merging line from the aluminium ingot line. These 2 constructors will output 120 aluminum casing per minute, and these will run along a manifold which will be feeding the 6 blenders. Half a foundation across from these 2 constructors, we will also be placing another 2 constructors. These will also be facing the top of the build and will be turning raw quartz into silica. You can see them in the pink box here. We will require a total of 50 silica per minute, so underclock the 2 accordingly. It should be 66.5% clock speed more or less, but it would be better to type in the actual output of 25 in the constructor. Now run the input of 30 raw quartz up along the 4th column. The 50 silica output will then wrap back around the input side, where it will merge on a raised manifold with the silica coming from refineries, which we will place next. However, before moving on to the refineries, make sure this raised manifold line runs along the foundry line, depositing the silica to help produce the aluminium ingots. At this point, we will need to place a total of 11 refineries. 6 of these will be creating sulfuric acid, and we'll start with these. I've placed these in the right of the build. For this, I'm using a double manifold with the outputs merging into a tier 2 pipe, that will run along a manifold into the blenders. Notice how these wrap around the refineries. These refineries will be set to sulfuric acid and set to 100% clock speed, and on the input side we will run the 300 sulfur along a raised manifold which is feeding them by elevator. Now the water in this build is once again the complicated part. For these refineries we will need a total of 300 water per minute, and we will create a loop to recycle the water from the batteries, but that will require us to oversaturate the input water line until the factory is up and running. So do be aware of that. However, the important thing here is to set the water lines up, ready for when that happens. So to do this, we will run the output pipes from the blender around the right of the build and then down to the side of the sulfuric acid refineries. This pipe will hold a total of 180 water per minute when this factory is up and running, and this pipe will need to merge with another water line prior to entering the sulfuric acid line. Make sure to use valves to control the direction of the water. This is really important. The second water pipe will be taking 30 water from the 60 water line, the light blue square that we saw earlier, and I've done this with a simple split using valves to limit the amount of flow to 30 water per minute on each pipe. This pipe will then run across the bottom of the build to the bottom right hand corner, where it will merge with the 180 water from the blenders. At this point we will have a total of 210 water merged for these refineries, so we will need to find another 90 water from another section of the build. This will come from the aluminum scrap refinery output line, which we will place next. Just note that this output line will be merged with the 30 pipeline before it spans to the bottom of the build. This is quite complicated, so do check out the article on Satisfactory Tips for more clarity if you are struggling here. Now, before we go to the aluminium scrap refinery, we're going to run that water input manifold into all of the sulfuric acid refineries. Now, as promised, we will now place the aluminum scrap refinery. This will be placed with the output facing the bottom of the build. This refinery will span the 4th and 5th column and should have roughly one foundation space at the front of the build. This will be set to aluminum scrap and set to 75% clock speed, with the water, as aforementioned, running to the bottom of the build and merging with the 30 water line before heading across to the sulfuric acid line, as you can see here. The output will send 270 scrap along a manifold line feeding the second input to the foundries that we placed earlier. Now let's look at the input side. This will be fed with 90 coal and the aluminum solution, which we shall now set up. Run the coal from the bottom alongside the raw quartz line into the refinery. We will now place the final 4 refineries. These will face the left of the build in the empty space in the middle of the build. These will all be set to alumina solution, with one of the refineries set to 50% clock speed. On the liquid output line, we will want to merge the outputs together and then feed 180 alumina solution to the aluminium scrap refinery, which we've just placed. You can do this by placing a valve and limiting the input to 180 for the refinery. The other 240 alumina solution should run along a 4th manifold into the blenders. For the solid output, we will also want to run all of this silica into the merger that we placed at the start of the silica foundry line to the left of the build. As for the input side, you will need to run 420 bauxite into the solid inputs. We will also need to input 630 water. This will be done by running the main 600 water line, the equivalent of 5 water extractors, into the refineries, using a Mark II pipe. We will then take the extra 30 that we split earlier and run that into the manifold line after the first refinery. And at this point you should be able to run this build at 100%, producing a total of 120 batteries per minute. But do remember, this is just a standard layout guide. You can implement this into any style of build that you want. This is just to give you an idea as to how everything flows. But hopefully this did help you out. I'm aware it's quite complicated, so do check the article below. And of course, if you did find it helpful, do drop a thumbs up and let me know what you'd like me to do in our next video. But until next time, thank you so much for watching, and special thanks to our amazing supporters, most notably our Solar Eclipse patrons, the Calamity and Cerebral Tag, as well as our Lunar Eclipse patrons, Chris McCabe and Lord of July, as well as our Blood Moon of the Day, Jimmy Rogers. Anyway guys, until next time, as always, ciao for now.